Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on Thursday. It is October 3rd, 2024 for what promises to be, I hope, a pretty informative webinar on how you can modernize your security operations with Google Security Operations and Bindplane. I'm joined today by Mike Kelly, the CEO of observIQ and Bindplane. My name is Jeremy Hale. We are two partners within this ecosystem within Google Security Operations that are really responsible for partnering with clientele, with organizations in migrations, data management, securing the full stack of your security operations via Google. And I think as we get a little bit further into it, you'll understand why Bindplane is really so revolutionary in this space. But before we go further into the content, let me turn it over to Mike for an introduction. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for joining. A really interesting topic, and looking forward to digging into it. But like you said, Jeremy, I'm the founder and CEO of observIQ. We've been partnering with Foresight, been partnering with Google, and our core product is Bindplane. It's unified telemetry pipeline. It's really focused on solving a lot of the challenges that come with managing a very large telemetry estate and simplifying that. And looking forward to digging into that more.
And again, I'm Jeremy. Let's jump into a little bit about observIQ, and then we'll cover a little bit more content as we lead into the latter portion of the presentation today and get into some high-level demonstrations of the platform. Mike, tell us a little bit about Bindplane.
Yeah, so we really specialize and focused on tools for DevOps and IT ops teams. We've been doing this for over a decade in observability and security space, and have been very involved in open telemetry. So if you're familiar with the project, it is a project that really pulls together a number of folks from the industry, really almost the entire industry, to back a single solution for ingesting and processing all of your telemetry. And over the past few years, it's been a big focus for us. We started by donating the log ingestion engine to the OpenTelemetry project. We added over 40 metric receivers to the project to expand the footprint and what's capable of ingesting and collecting. Did the same thing with log plugins, and more recently we've added the remote management protocol. So we're a co-developer of the op-amp protocol that lets us with Bindplane and lets others manage open telemetry collectors and do that remotely and do it at scale. So I've been focused on this, developing integrations, agents, and pipelines for many years now. And our partnership with Google, specifically with Bindplane, goes back to 2019 when we started providing Bindplane as a solution to help Google customers ingest and manage telemetry into Google Cloud Ops, and then expanded more recently into SecOps. So that's a little bit about us, and yeah, looking forward to getting into more of the details.
So the evolution of the relationship of Google SecOps is an interesting one, because back in 2019, Mike, when they had really kicked off that kind of uniform experience for security, it was really more like as a security analytics data lake, right? And that's a consistent complication within that ecosystem is, how do we get data out of either on-prem or cloud infrastructure into that analytics engine, that data lake that was the artist formerly known as Chronicle, and then before that, Backstory. A lot of companies actually having to look at intermediate or heavy forwarder architecture to be able to get a lot of that data out of the ecosystem. But Foresite Cybersecurity is a partner within that Google ecosystem as well, a strategic alliance partner. We partner with them very closely in conducting these migrations and ongoing platform management of Google SecOps. We work with a number of large enterprises that sometimes have needs for data feed or bifurcation of certain data streams, or have specific requirements about how they get telemetry out. And I think, as folks will see today on the presentation, there is a lot of really novel capabilities within Bindplane, right? The ability to send to multiple destinations, to obfuscate certain fields, to compress logs. And we'll get into some of that as you get into your presentation, Mike. But Foresight really does kind of shine light on how the art of the possible exists within migration to SecOps. We also provide managed security services. We are one of three strategic alliance partners within that Google portfolio that carries run, build, service credentials. And I think that we're really excited about this partnership with Bindplane because it does solve a lot of those original problematic issues, right? Customers always looking at augmentation, looking at migration. How do we get from something that is a steady state in operations, even though we're unsatisfied with it, into SecOps, get that data normalized, and then either operationalize it themselves or partner closely with an organization like Foresight to continuously observe the platform and then also security alerts coming from those environments. So a little bit about Foresight. We could talk more about that later as we get into SecOps. But why don't we start looking at the high-level portions of Bindplane? You can kind of lead us into some of that documentation and content, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thanks. And working with Foresight's been really great because I think it is, especially today, critical that you're looking forward, right? That you're looking to modernize, you're looking to adopt what's available, and this team here is really focused on that. And that's what we're focused on with Bindplane and the solutions that we're providing. Bindplane at the highest level is a unified telemetry platform, and that be a new term, but what it means is that we're managing all of the telemetry in an environment. And that could be at massive scale. We use open telemetry collectors. Sometimes it's thousands or even hundreds of thousands of open telemetry collectors and agents that are deployed, and manage them from a single console within Bindplane. And what that does is it gives you a lot of power and control over the telemetry that you're transmitting and you're routing. And those are kind of the key in the top four reasons you may want to adopt Bindplane. One is with this in place, with open telemetry, you're able to route data from any source to any destination. So what we mean by that is you're going to have all types of applications, logs, metrics, traces within your environment. Some of those are going to be custom applications. Some are packaged apps, your business critical apps that you're running. We allow you to ingest any of that, and there are very few exceptions. And then once it's within the pipeline, you can do all kinds of things. But the routing first, you can ingest from any source, and then you can route it to any destination. So if you're going to SecOps, that's covered, that's easy. What if you're considering migrating from another platform to SecOps? Sometimes you want to route it to one first or to both of them at the same time and then start to ship that over. So that's kind of the routing component. The standardization is standardizing on open vendor neutral standards. And a lot of folks are moving to or considering moving to open telemetry. We've also heard and seen that can be challenging sometimes, especially when you're doing that at scale. But Bindplane lets you do that in a much easier way and then manage it all from a single control plane. And once you're standardized on a single type, whether it's open telemetry, which we recommend, but if you're choosing a single standard, that means there's less work for everyone on your team, right? There's less for them to know. There's less subject matter expertise that's required. You don't have silos. You're really using one standard, whether it's the transmission or the actual agents that you're using, the SDKs, those are all going to be the same. That's one of the big benefits of standardizing, and Bindplane helps you to do that. Simplifying is maybe an extension of that, but it's looking at these when your telemetry infrastructure, whether it's multiple destinations, means that you're using all types of different proprietary agents. It's simply too big to really manage well with the existing tools. Bindplane lets you simplify that and manage it all from a single console, and then understand what's happening within that pipeline, within that environment. Last is reducing the costs. So with Bindplane, once you have it in place and you have visibility into your entire telemetry landscape, you literally see the flow of data from point to point. And when you can do that, you can start to pinpoint where you can reduce those. Now, we focus on reducing cost by reducing volume for the most part. So we can look at removing data that's not needed anywhere, that's not going to impact your visibility in the final destination, but it is unnecessary, unneeded, and we can take that out and provide recommendations to do that. and a full suite of tools that allow you to eliminate unneeded data or just ignore data that you don't need at the ingestion point. Because we're managing the entire thing from end to end, you're able to do that with Bindplane.
And so I think when we start looking at real migration scenarios, right? It's like it's easy to say that Google SecOps is probably going to be one of those front runners in terms of security information and event management going forward, right? You've got this massive ecosystem out there in the Azure and Microsoft space as well. Surprisingly, perhaps AWS really hasn't waded into the SIEM space from a security and architecture perspective because there are a number of vendors in that space. I think Google ends up being one of those front runners, though. And in order to make these migrations more palatable, more plausible for entities that are looking to bring telemetry both from on-prem because they can't escape the on-prem infrastructure, or there's requirements to keep that data in a DC, or there is a need for customers to hybridize, potentially use both platforms. Foresight has bound to Google security operations specifically because the migration of our originally AWS native SIEM technology into GCP as that core cloud provider for us just makes sense. The acquisition of Mandiant this last year, now putting Google and SecOps at the forefront of really the threat intelligence, global visibility, a snapshot of the internet every second, for example, within that ecosystem. But it all starts with the possibilities, the migration, the mechanics, right? We've chosen to partner with Bindplane because the technology actually works. You had seen in those 4 critical categories on the previous slide, the core promises of adopting the platform. And I think that the ostensible open flexibility of the platform, giving us the ability to route from multiple destinations, bring it all into a centralized, centrally managed capability, especially for security telemetry and even non-security event telemetry in the broader GCP ecosystem, is really very promising, right? When we start looking at time to value, that's a core focus for Foresight. Previously, we had all of these headaches in the way that we were able to get data sources in. It either came in via API. We actually had to push it to a log forwarder. We had to potentially reach into some type of GCS bucket or an S3 bucket in AWS and begin moving that data in. There's still going to be those nuanced cases where we have to bring that telemetry into SecOps in flexible methodologies. But what Bindplane is promising is the ability to actually streamline and centralize all of that. You had heard Mike state that potentially hundreds of agents deployed across an environment, more complex infrastructure that is really then simplistically reduced into visual parameters within SaaS-based applications. The management of Bindplane is something that Foresight does for you as part of the migration. And a number of the headaches that we've experienced as practitioners over the course of the last 3 to 5 years have kind of gone away in the last 4 to 6 months with the inclusion of Bindplane for Google specifically. But we can help you sort through those issues, those complications, very rapidly begin to show you in practice how the deployment of Bindplane can get that data into SecOps so that we can more rapidly operationalize signals from the environment. And all of that, I think, leans really heavily into autonomic operations. There's been this broader philosophical notion originally kicked off by Aman Ghanizada over on the Google side, like when Chronicle was leaning into becoming SecOps, this idea of autonomic operations, the ability to very easily, simplistically create data streams and flows that let us begin to more rapidly respond to those environments. And I think as you start to see the inclusion of things like AI, Gemini, and SecPalm 2 within that ecosystem, applied threat intelligence. And when we're parsing and correcting telemetry at the perimeter, we get better correlation across that telemetry once the data is being moved into SecOps and we're pulling it from your infrastructure and putting it into Google SecOps via this transport methodology. And then hyperscale cloud infrastructure, mid-market, low-level enterprise, even enterprise clientele now find themselves kind of in multiple clouds, in multiple places. So how do we get that to a centralized operational platform? And I think some of the continued technical dialogue, as well as potentially the demo at the end of this webinar, kind of shine some light on that. And I'd love to be able to explore that with you as we go forward. Back to you, sir.
Thanks. Get into a little bit more about Bindplane before we talk and walk through a demo. I mentioned the any source any destination concept, and this is key. Part of this comes from using the OpenTelemetry collector, and then the additional integrations that we built on top of that for metric, log, and trace integrations. With as I mentioned, a big focus on log specifically, but everything that's available within OpenTelemetry in terms of your ability to ingest, and then everything that has been added as part of Bindplane is available within the product. So it's over 50 sources available today, as well as a wide number of generic sources that allow you to, if something doesn't exist or you have a custom application, to ingest that, process it, just like you would any other log type, and do that all from within Bindplane and using the OpenTelemetry collector as is. Destinations are similarly. We have over 15 destinations. I think we're closer to 20 at this point, including everything that you would expect from within Google. So SecOps, CloudOps, storage as well, Managed Prometheus. Those are all available within Bindplane. And we can actually go beyond that. So if you are looking at an environment that is, maybe you have mixed components, you're using Splunk, or maybe you're using Datadog in some areas, you can add in the destination for any of those as well. And then you're really standardizing everything on a single telemetry landscape. Now, when you do that, that also enables the migrations. And I know we'll talk more about this, but if you're looking to send a duplicate or parallel data stream through a migration, validate that everything's working correctly, make sure you're using the identical data in both locations, that's what you can do with Bindplane. And this is something that's always expanding, always adding new sources, destinations, processors. Really, there's a focus on the project, the community, within observIQ and within Bindplane to make sure that we are covering everything in the scope of what's needed for enterprise organizations that are looking to use Bindplane in their environments. And then I'd like to talk about how we support Google. So Jeremy mentioned Bindplane for Google, and this is available at no additional cost to customers. So you can use this for SecOps, you can use this for CloudOps, but what it's really focused on, and there are a few different areas. The one that we've talked about already is this is a full pipeline, full observability or full telemetry pipeline that you can use within your environments for anything Google. It's also an area where we want to support folks with open telemetry adoption. So if you have an initiative, you're thinking about an initiative, this is a great place to start. It's a place that simplifies what's there, makes it easier to get this into your environments, to adopt it, to work within your environments. So if you have other agent types, proprietary agents, or other open source agents that you're using today, you don't necessarily have to re-instrument everything. We can let you use OpenTelemetry in the middle and then route it through and then get all the benefits that you would have of Bindplane, of OpenTelemetry that way. So OpenTelemetry adoption is a big one. You want to make that as simple as possible, and we'll show you how we do that. Another is collecting data that's off GCP. So for some of the telemetry that you're looking for, it may already be provided by GCP directly to those systems. You may not necessarily need an additional component, but there is a whole range. Now you can use Bindplane on GCP, you can use it off GCP, use it for your applications or custom apps. But we want to make sure that there's a way that you can ingest everything, whether it's from other clouds outside of Google Cloud, whether it's applications that you have on-prem, other applications that maybe aren't supported out of the box with existing collection mechanisms. So that is one of the second key components of what we're doing here. And then the last one, as we've mentioned, is accelerating those migrations. So there are multiple wins here when you install and set up Bindplane in an environment that you're considering migrating. You get all the benefits that we've talked about, where you're moving to an open standard with OpenTelemetry. You have clear visibility and management of a very large scale pipeline. You've simplified it, you've gained visibility, and making it easier on your teams. And you can also migrate much easier from one platform to another. And you can do that side by side. You can see what's happening while you're doing it and shift over those agents as needed.
So I think in the conversations with clientele, one of the prohibitive elements of all of that is how we begin to onboard, right? So let's say there's been a determination by security practitioners internally or a change in relationship. Maybe Foresight is picking up managed security services for your organization, and we're looking at a potential migration or an augmentation to existing infrastructure for a period of time in order to kick off these services or enable your team with the platform to be able to protect your org. And it's almost always a conversation around scoping, assessment, and prioritization of the migration of data, right? You may have security and non-security event use cases. I had said that before within the utilization of your SIEM. The aggregation of that data may require multiple parties, multiple verticals within your organization to fulfill the outcomes that you may be looking for from a success criteria perspective. So we always start with the critical or high volume telemetry first. And I think that that's really an area where Bindplane excels, right? Being able to get critical data sources moved to two destinations to start working on the idea of parity. There's almost always rules or detection logic that have to take place in a core platform. And since we're having a conversation about SecOps specifically, you'll notice the Google spin to a lot of this. And there's a lot of flexibility within Bindplane that Mike has covered and we'll certainly see as we go through the rest of this webinar series. But the idea of being able to bring data into SecOps, normalize that telemetry, and sometimes we see variance, right? Within Google security operations, we're normalizing data, say from your EDR control, in universal data model. So parsing is taking place where we're extrapolating certain elements of that raw log and creating fields within UDM. If you're conducting a migration from something like Splunk, you're obviously used to common information model and the way that it normalizes that data so that we can get correlation across multiple logs or rule-based detection logic written around the normalization of that log. But the levers that we can pull now to easily move telemetry over into SecOps are pretty phenomenal. Before, if you've ever dealt with forwarder architecture, even if we wanted to reach into existing forwarder architecture, the idea of managing YAML files on those forwarders can become quite problematic. I did want to stress again that the nature of open telemetry, the evolution of the Bindplane relationship with Google, what we heard when we were at Elevate this summer in San Francisco with the Google teams, all of us, was that Bindplane is potentially becoming the default replacement for default Chronicle forwarder architecture, right? And I said that word default twice because it may be indistinguishable. The idea of onboarding data to SecOps in the future probably involves Bindplane. Unless there are specific requirements or parameters within your organization that stop us from doing so, that would be the recommended lead. So as customers engage us now for proof of value, or they want to start talking about migration or augmentation or offset of costs, all of those things blend seamlessly into that exploratory motion that starts with scoping and assessing the environment, and then positioning Bindplane agents around your ecosystem to begin moving that telemetry into SecOps. It is much less of a headache these days. It's altogether been better for us as security practitioners, and I think that that will continue to evolve, and so hopefully we see that as the de facto standard going forward. Once telemetry is moving into SecOps, we have the ability to optimize and control, and I think that that takes place at two different layers. You'll see that in the SaaS application that is Bindplane, the ability to potentially eliminate empty fields, for example, which leads to compression of cost. And since we're always looking at consumption into SecOps, that's a really big part of the conversation. How much are we actually ingesting? Are we bringing in needless telemetry? Is there a better way to migrate this data? Can we set up a phased approach that is not an all or nothing situation? Like, is it possible for us to truly augment the existing infrastructure to conduct a better migration and then prioritize how we move that data in to deprecate dependency in that augmentation or that migration. Now, sometimes things have to move a little faster. We understand that. And I think that controls, technologies like Bindplane really give us the ability to get there better than it had in the past. And if you've been acclimated to SecOps or have explored it in the past, seeing it in action is really quite revealing. If we could go to the next one, sir. Thank you. So a quick overview of the Google Security Operations Platform. I think us talking about migration to SecOps really wouldn't be very healthy without us at least diving in at a high level into what it is. Foresight is a managed security service provider. We really do provide top-down governance for organizations that are looking for full compliance standards, MSSP, security operations center coverages, extension to their team from a blue team perspective, active consultancy around compliance, virtual CISO services, et cetera. When you explore that Google portfolio of partners, there are many who do this, but none quite so well as Foresight. On the other side of us, if you were to look at a SecOps platform these days, you've got essentially what is still a security analytics data lake. It's got user, entity, and behavior analytics. You've got a full rules engine. You've now got Gemini being baked into the core fabric of that platform. Think things like overviews, guided analyst support, the ability to sift through potentially petabytes of information very, very rapidly to get to what you're looking for, the ability to author queries or write rules, or even automate the creation of playbooks and automated workflows that would pass through your infrastructure at the core of SecOps these days. And I expect that to continue to evolve, right? AI is not a magical robot in the sky. It's actually a tool that we would use to simplify our ability as humans to provide directives to the platform and then return the results that we want. And all of this links back into how do we get data into that platform effectively. And that's kind of what we're talking about. But Mandiant, on the right side of a SecOps environment, is now providing us some really interesting and novel capabilities. You're taking the global threat intelligence capabilities of Mandiant, their threat hunting services, even managed defense now fully wrapped around a SecOps platform or a SecOps environment, and you're getting MSSP services on the left-hand side. A lot of the partnership with Bindplane would see us managing that architecture for you. But frankly, the ease of use in the platform makes it so that you could probably pretty easily, in fact. What we want to do is provide this really open experience in terms of the way that you would consume our services. We would want to enable and train your teams on how to utilize all of the tools. But in SecOps, previously Chronicle, you have all of the Mandiant threat intel. You have these advisory, managed, and professional services on the left side, Mandiant's threat intelligence and maybe advanced operations in terms of threat hunting on the right side, and then the core platform in the center. What we're seeing from SecOps these days is that you still have the SIEM component. There was an acquisition almost 2 years ago now of a company called Simplify. That is the SOAR element of Google security operations these days. So where you would do case management, where you would provide limited or more advanced controls to analysts or other providers within your ecosystem. We're also seeing user and entity behavior analytics, which is essentially rules that would fire within the SIEM, just like you would see rules fire off of various layered controls. The incorporation of VirusTotal and Mandiant threat intelligence now being consumed directly from the platform in the form of what they're calling Google Threat Intelligence. That platform as a standalone is pretty revolutionary, but I expect that we will see the SIEM component, the SOAR component, the ability to very seamlessly move telemetry in and out of that GCP ecosystem using Bindplane, all begin to meld over the course of the next year or 2 years into something that is really groundbreaking. It is probably revolutionary and certainly one of the front 3 platforms going forward. But SIEM, SOAR, response playbooks, think of all of those components where previously maybe your investments were leading you in multiple directions, or you were having to cobble together multiple platforms to get interdiction between those investments, now being in a centralized pane of glass. We were saying the same thing 4 years ago. It is a reality today. When you see the platform in practice, when you actually see it operational and you begin to see your telemetry within Google SecOps, the clouds kind of part and the possibilities really begin to present themselves. And so I think with this cloud native data lake, we kind of want to start going a little more into agent management at scale and kind of start diving down a little bit more into what the platform does, and hopefully round it out today with a little bit of a demo with Bindplane. So hopefully we can kind of entice you to join us for the second version of the webinar here.
That's a great overview, and there's a lot there. But the reason we've been partnering with Foresight and also focused on SecOps is that this is, becoming a really amazing platform. And we think that with the ingestion and telemetry management that you get with Bindplane, really becomes a complete solution. And a piece of that is agent management at scale. So this is, I would say 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, this wasn't really a challenge that people thought about in the same way. And it's because the scale of the problem wasn't what it is today, right? Regardless of the size of your company, the growth, and I think everyone that is, on this webinar is familiar with this, the growth has been exponential. And that is where systems start to break and processes don't work, and you need a different solution. And so when we talk about simplifying agent management, this is the reason we focus on this is we have customers that have hundreds of thousands of agents that are deployed throughout their environment, sometimes a lot more than that. And so that was a focus from the beginning, was making sure that this, not only that we can do this well, but that we can do it well for the very largest customers. We have validated up to 250,000 OpenTelemetry agents managed by a single instance, all updated in real time. I expect that to double and triple in the next couple of months. This is something that we are really pushing to expand because there is a real need for that type of scale. And with the architecture of the platform, and because we are using and orchestrating a fleet of OpenTelemetry agents, there isn't the bottleneck that you would see if you had a single collection mechanism, a single way of processing that data, because you can distribute this across all of them. So we can distribute processing across all the agents. We can have multiple gateways. And that really means that your throughput and your scale ends up being limitless. So that's a component of it. But simplifying agent management also means things like making it easier to configure and roll out your configuration changes at scale. And it's not something that's easy to do today. At this type of scale, you don't want to be, manually updating YAML files and then pushing them out, even if you have a great solution to do that, to roll those out. That is very error prone. And so what we do is put in guardrails to prevent that. Automatically updating agents, so we can look at the agents and track them and validate for you that they are on the right version, or push out a new agent update as needed. And then we have full CLI support and automation integration. So sometimes you may love Bindplane, may want to use all the functionality, but you also have the GitOps workflow that you want to integrate with. And so what we provide is all the functionality that you see and we'll see in the demo is also available via a CLI and an API. And we have templates for doing things like GitHub Actions to add additional steps to verifying changes before you push them out to Bindplane and then your agents. So that's all available. It's some of that we have pre-built for you to use. We have a lot of customers that have their own custom integrations that they use the CLI and API for. And then the last piece, and this sometimes is best shown in a demo, but data reduction and routing. So we really focus on, within Bindplane, when we help you visualize telemetry and the flows of telemetry, focused on identifying where those high throughput sources are. What are the agents or applications or groups that are creating the largest footprint within your environments, and then helping you to identify how do we compress this or filter it or reroute it without losing any context. So we're not looking to eliminate telemetry and then say, you can make do without these. They're not going to be critical. We know that's typically not something that's acceptable for teams. What we do want to do is identify those pieces that are not going to be relevant to the platform. It's not going to be something that is necessary within SecOps. It's not going to benefit you in any way from a security stance, and eliminate that. And there's a lot that you can eliminate. But we also have other strategies, and some of those are, migrating to or shifting a data stream to a cloud bucket. So we can send that to Google Cloud Storage. And sometimes if you reroute that data there, it is still available if you need that for compliance reasons. You may want to rehydrate that later. You still have a clean and the perfect copy of that telemetry that's available to you over time. So another way that we help to reduce cost through routing, and ultimately really where this savings usually comes in, it's through two things. One is we've reduced the complexity and the difficulty and challenges managing. That means your team can focus on other things. You don't need the same team just to manage because you have 200,000 agents. You don't need an entire team to handle just that component of your infrastructure. And so it simplifies that down, lets you do more with the team that you have and focus on the things that you really care about and are really interested in working on. So I'll just jump right into a demo and just pull up Bindplane here. So I'll give a quick overview, and as we go, of course, happy to answer questions. But this is Bindplane. This is an instance. And before I get started, I'm going to show a quick architecture diagram just so you know what it is that we're looking at when I walk through this. And I'll touch on a few key features, a few key benefits. And I know that in the next couple of webinars, we're going to dig even deeper into how to use it and what those benefits are. So first of all, this is the rough architecture of Bindplane, very simplified. And we're looking at today is the UI, the front end, the server Bindplane. But what's really happening is Bindplane is connecting over OpAmp, the protocol for managing agents, to a fleet of OTel agents. And I'm showing 3 here. They might exist on a host. They might exist in a Kubernetes environment. Those are typically, but not always, sending to a collector gateway, and then it can be sent on to the destination. So what we're looking at is the control plane. But all of that telemetry, the volume of the data, is flowing through the collectors, and this can all be configured from within Bindplane. So when we go into the first, or this view here, we're looking at the Bindplane server, and from this overview, we see we're managing a little over 8,000 agents in this demo environment. We can see we're sending this to a few different areas. One, a gateway, sending some data to SecOps, another to Splunk. And we use this as an example because we want to talk about what it looks like to shift, but also that we can support multiple destinations. So if you're using multiple tools, this is still a solution that you can use in your environment. And this view is really meant to help you understand at a high level what your environment, what's happening in your environment, where a lot of that volume is coming from, and then to group and categorize different agents and different telemetry. Of course, we have logs, metrics, and traces visible. And we also have a view, I'll show one that has a bit more data on it. So this is really critical view for us and for customers, because it tells you if there's one thing that you can take away from this view, it's how much telemetry are you ingesting and how much are you sending. And we really want to see that number much lower, right? And so in this case, we seeing 48 gigs in and then 29.8 out. So it's a roughly 40% reduction in the volume of data. So it allows you to look at that across a large environment. It gives you things like all the agents that are there, what's connected, disconnected, some basic error messages, and then more detailed information about those configurations that you may want to look at where they're sending or sending or collecting the most data within an environment. We also have a couple of other concepts before I show off some of the capabilities. One is agents. This is just going to give you a view of all the agents individually that you're managing, and then configurations. You can think of this as the different fleets that you have configured. And this is really one of the most powerful areas. It allows you to build and manage and view configurations at a high level or down to a very granular level. And then finally, library. This is where we have reusable components. So as you build something out once, you can reuse this in a number of different configurations. So we can have a specific destination. You can build out a custom processor, and you can reuse that over and over again within your environment. So you've got the agent view here. This is a table of agent information. But what I wanted to show quickly is how easy it can be to get started with Bindplane. And a lot of you, once you get this installed and you're starting this out, you're going to build the Bindplane agent into some of your DevOps tooling. But when you're getting started, it's really helpful to just have a install script, a way to get this going, run it inside of your environment. And so that's what we provide. Show one more time. We'll give it a shot in a second. But what we provide is the automated installation script. So it's something that's not built or available out of the box with the native OTel collectors, but something that we found is, there we go, is missing, and a lot of folks find really useful. So we just installed the collector. It's as soon as it gets deployed, that just downloaded the latest collector. It installed it, configured it, pointed it back at our Bindplane instance, and within a couple seconds, you're going to see that agent's available. It shows up within the Bindplane environment. So if I go to the agent table, you can see I had that that agent is now deployed and ready, and I don't have any configurations. And so I can go in and build out a configuration really easily. And this, if I can select and build in a no-code solution, can choose the sources that I want to include. So I'll pick a couple of really simple sources, but you can see this is a list of a number of the sources that are available, at least for this specific collector. And a lot of these are generic, and a lot of them allow you to ingest from other platforms. So some of the key things, if you have a lot of syslog within your environment, you're able to get all of that in with the syslog receiver. In this case, I'm going to take a look at a couple. We'll choose Postgres, and we'll choose some basic host metrics. And then I'm going to pick a generic log source. So we want to get a sample of a few different options that you can pull from within an environment. And so maybe we have a CSV file. And directly to the syslog option that we mentioned before. All right. So we have a few sources. Now, this is going to be deployed with that configuration. We'll add a destination and choose SecOps. And save it. And now, so we've built, we deployed an agent. We built a configuration. I can add this configuration to that agent, apply it, and then we're ready to go. And this won't be very interesting. I have much more interesting configurations that we can show. And let me jump to some of those. And when you do have an error, as I did, I probably included a source that wasn't available on this OS. Go into that and tell you exactly why. So this SecOps exporter, because we didn't have the credentials on my Mac, it didn't show up. But another way that makes it easy to debug and manage your agents at scale. Let's go into a couple others. I have one that's pre-populated. This is a configuration that shows ingesting IIS logs and metrics, some host metrics, and then a set of Windows events. Now, in this case, we're sending it to a couple of places. Discard the changes here. We'll start from clean slate. So I have this sending to Splunk in this case. And the reason I'm sending it to Splunk, I just want to show what it looks like to send side by side. So all of this data is flowing. You get a sense of how much telemetry you're ingesting from each of these, and then you see what you're going to be ingesting at that destination. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add in a SecOps destination. And then I'm going to roll that out, and that will change and update this in a moment. So it did push out that configuration to the agent. In this case, there was one, but in some cases, there are going to be thousands. So now I have a duplicate stream of data, one going to my Splunk instance, one going to Google SecOps. And I can, if I do a quick search, we have some data flowing through here, can see the data as it's flowing and in real time. So in this case, I have some metrics that are available, but we can watch and look while this is happening, and then add processors to manipulate or reduce that data as it's flowing through. And this is a really powerful function within Bindplane. It's something that allows you to make those changes rapidly and with confidence, and then stage them out. So what we're doing here is that we've shifted the transmission into a parallel mode. And then after we've completed that portion, we can go back in and look and say, all right, now I want to look at what I'm sending to this particular destination. So I'm looking at what's being sent to Splunk. One thing you'll notice is that we have the full range of logs, the raw snapshot of logs that are coming in through this agent. And we will automatically run that sample data through a full suite of recommendations or recommendation tests. So we look for things like, can you remove a set of empty values and reduce the amount of volume? And in this case, we can. We can, just by deleting those empty values, we saw that you can reduce this by 11%. It's 11% of the total volume. And so if we go in and take a look, it's as simple as accepting that, and then we are good to go. Now we'll see the changes from one to the other. So if I expand this log, I can see these particular fields are now gone. Right? We've removed them entirely. It's indicated that they're not present in the output. This is a simulation, so we haven't applied this to anything yet. Also, filter by severity. This is often something that we would consider. And if I'm looking at the amount of data coming through, you may say, well, what we really care about is that we're only going to be filtering out data or we're going to be filtering out anything that's just informational. Leave the debug, leave the other conditions as part of this, and that can frequently reduce your the volume significantly. You can see that here, where by removing that information and only allowing through warning or higher, we reduce the volume from, in this case, about 180 lines in this snapshot to 38. So significant reductions. And those are just a couple of the ways that we can start to reduce the data. That's reducing what's going to Splunk. Now, what we typically do here is we're sending the data both locations. We're going to reduce the data. Once we validate that everything looks correct and that this is operating the way we expect, we don't need to do anything else with instrumentation. We're just going to remove the previous destination, roll this out, and now we have an environment that's set, it's ready to go, and we are sending everything to SecOps. So we've completed the migration in just a couple of steps while running it side by side throughout. One other area, and I mentioned this in terms of routing, is the ability to send to a storage destination. So cold storage, low-cost storage. Frequently, this would be if we have telemetry that we're collecting and we want to send this for compliance reasons, or maybe this is something that we may want to come back and look at later if there's something for like a post-mortem kind of review, but is not considered something we're using for threat detection. we can send that to a low-cost storage bucket. And this is another way to manage your costs, make sure that we're not sending more than we need. So in this case, I'm going to send this to a Google Cloud bucket as well. Send it out to those destinations. And then what we can do is, again, we'll reduce this a bit, filter out debug logs, save that. And then what we'll see in a couple of minutes, I'll come back to this and you'll see that we're sending the full fidelity copy of the data to that low-cost storage bucket. And then we're reducing data before we send it to SecOps. This is a really common scenario that our customers are using. So let me go into a couple of other configurations just to give you a quick view, and then I'll leave a couple minutes for some questions. This is another simple scenario, and I already showed this splitting it and sending from one to another. This can be a little bit simplistic, or it may look simplistic, but really what we're showing here is you can ingest into OpenTelemetry and into the Bindplane pipeline from things like FluentBit or FluentD. So if you already have a environment instrumented with agents, it doesn't mean that you need to rip and replace everything. Sometimes you can just point it to a Bindplane agent, and then we can pull it into that OpenTelemetry pipeline. And that's what we're doing here. And that really can simplify the effort needed to adopt this and allow a path for a step-by-step migration to OpenTelemetry, Bindplane, and SecOps. Again, we're doing things with this. So the data is coming in unparsed. You can parse this, or you can leave it raw. And going into SecOps, we want to leave this, maintain a raw version of that log. But along the way, it can be helpful to parse out components so you can do intelligent filtering based on those values. So things like parsing JSON and severity and timestamp. Those are all capabilities that you can, and abilities within Bindplane. And one additional piece here that I wanted to show, because this is something that comes up frequently, but it's masking sensitive data. So we can look at the log data, and frequently you'll want to, at the source, remove anything that is, will be considered PII or sensitive data. And that is really simple with Bindplane, as just adding a processor at some point in that pipeline. And so we'll save that and then go back in and see that, what that translation looks like. And so if you have anything that is a IP address, we missed it in this one. Okay, so we have the host, and we're showing what would typically be the IP address. We mask that out so it's no longer visible at any other point in the pipeline. And that can be something to really assist you with your compliance and removing sensitive PII data or other elements that you don't want getting through to certain systems. And that pairs along well with the routing and other capabilities. And the last thing I'll show you, I have this workstation configuration, and it's applied to 8,000 agents. Now, this would be pretty typical if we were in an environment where we had a large number of, say, laptops we're pulling logs from. And we make a change to this, and I can delete these metrics, that all of these are sending to a gateway. It's going to be a cluster of agents to allow it to scale considerably. But in this case, what we want to do is roll this out. Now, there are 8,000, and so sometimes we want more than just send this immediately to all 8,000. We may want to do things like a progressive rollout and say, what is the first stage? What are we sending that to? A canary deployment. And that's all possible within Bindplane. So we can set a number of these, some that are called stage, and we can look at the environment stage. And so now in this rollout, it's going to send it to all of my agents that we have tagged as stage before we do anything else. Save that, and we can see there's a stage component. The first 10 there are going to be run before we push that afterward. I'll give an example here, and I know we're planning to talk a lot more about this, so I'll pause here and move it on to the wrap up. But again, I appreciate everyone taking the time to have a look, and love to talk about Bindplane and SecOps and how we've been working with Foresight recently.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate the time and energy in the demo. For those of you that will be joining us for the second version of the webinar, basically episode 2, we're going to be getting into accelerating legacy SIEM migration with Bindplane. I would expect that these, along the course of this webinar series, for these to become increasingly more in-depth. So if you're technically minded, you're really substantially considering a better way forward in terms of like augmentation, migration. I mean, I think just that last piece with the PII alone, frankly, the ability to obfuscate certain fields is something that as practitioners has been a major sticking point for us. So again, Mr. Kelly, thank you very much for the expert tutelage today. Thank you to everybody for joining us. The second of this webinar series will be on the 10th of October at the same time, and then the third on the 17th of October at the same time of day. I think proactively, you had actually answered most of the questions that hit the feed just through the demo. So thanks for the time again. It was good to see you, Mike, and we'll see you folks next week.
Good to see you, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.